Hi, I'm Brian Welsh, and this is the Blocktalk podcast. Here we want to have real conversations about what's happening in the industry, what's happening in the block management manufacturing industry, what the challenges are, and what's shaping the future. I started it to talk to people who live it day to day, industry experts, government, anyone else who's a stakeholder who feeds into that industry. So whether you're here for a fresh perspective, insight, inspiration, whatever you're here for, I'm glad you're listening. Thanks very much. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Blocktalk podcast with me, Brian Welsh. Okay, so today we are tackling some newspaper reports back in April on the transparency of property factoring. So we have David Doran, who works in the property factoring space and leads Hack and Comparison. Today he's here in his capacity as the vice chair of what is now TPI Scotland, used to be the Property Managers Association Scotland. We have Paul Sweeney, who was referenced in a couple of these articles. He was born in Springburn in 1989. He joined the army at 17, served with Royal Signals and Royal Regiment of Scotland through to 2018. Worked at BAE Systems, has worked at Scottish Enterprise, started his political career in 2017 and has been MSP for Glasgow region since 2021. I hope I got that right.
Yeah, more or less.
Good. It was what was written down here. So guys, welcome. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming over to have this chat. Okay, so we've got a few things to get through, but I guess the first thing to talk about, David, I'm coming to you. Perception versus reality. And I think this is where a lot of the challenges happen, certainly in this industry. David, tell us what the role of a factor is and what are their duties.
Predominantly, the role of a factor is to administer a collective group of owners' obligations that they sign up to when they purchase a house, purchase a flat. So that tends to be the common maintenance, common insurance of blocks of flats, ground maintenance developments, as we'll talk about. And the factor's role is predominantly to pull all that together, pull all the collective ownership together to try and get things done, to maintain the property, to insure it, and really be the communication tool between these groups of owners and other stakeholders, whether that be contractors working on their behalf, insurance companies, and so on and so forth. It's probably quite simple as that. You could go in and say, what else do they do? Their duties arise from both the Property Factors Act and terms of service that we're required to deliver that arose from the Property Factors Act, which were generally in place anyway prior to the Act. They probably just weren't formalised in a singular document because most factors had already been doing that, since day dot of factoring.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you. Just to set the scene, I guess. Paul, you've described the current model as a racket. Do you stand by that and explain what brought you to that kind of conclusion?
Well, it might have been a provocative description to John Boothman at the Times when he stopped me in the corridor in Parliament and was asking me about factoring. Maybe a reflection of my frustration of casework. So as a Glasgow parliamentarian, you tend to pick up a lot of casework from housing. So in Glasgow's case, about 3/4 of the housing stock, just under perhaps, is flatted property.
Yep.
And more often than not, a flatted property will have some form of factoring arrangements. The other form of factoring that you come across, certainly where I tend to represent areas like Rob Royston, are 1990s, early 2000s new build suburban housing estates where there's common estate management through a factor as well. And more often than not, there's a lot of quality issues that arise, attentiveness to repairs, quality of repairs, disputes arising, lack of agreement or cooperation with owners in a certain block, etc. And just a sense that the quality and accountability isn't what it could be.
Yeah.
So perhaps saying Racket, I guess you want to provoke a debate, so I suppose maybe it was a way of doing that, and it certainly seems to have had an effect. so maybe the intention was reasonable. So I think we do need to have a debate about that. We're now nearly 15 years on from the last piece of legislation on this, and indeed we're now coming up to 50 years this year of community-based housing associations in Glasgow, which is a big milestone for that kind of movement, which is plays a big role in factoring property in the city. So it would be interesting to take stock on where we are. We've got a looming housing crisis in Glasgow, not just in terms of the need for housing and extra housing to be built. It's actually the condition, particularly of our pre-war stock.
Tenemental stock.
Yeah, about 70,000 Victorian Edwardian sandstone tenements in Glasgow that were heavily invested in the 1970s and 80s, and now the life cycle of those repairs are all coming to a head now. And we're seeing a real glut of issues emerging in the last few years with these buildings. And I need to really address tenement maintenance and the role of the factor in that.
Okay. Do you have anything to add to that, what Paul said?
No, I'd probably agree with most of what was said in that. Yeah, absolutely. It's a critical time, and probably the most critical, although it's been going on for 40 years. It's getting to a point now that we're seeing failure. And I mean failure of buildings. We're now seeing that more prevalent. And
I guess the big question is, and we're going to get to this, who pays for it though? That's the big challenge. I mean, we've done we had Mark Griffin on a podcast. It's not gone out yet. It will do before this goes out. And we had a big conversation around sinking funds. So should there be a sinking fund that runs forever and money gets put into? Because you've got 50 years worth of it's coming round, and most people will agree that after 50 years, you then start having roof problems. You start having a lot of problems, and then when you get to that stage, it's the person who currently lives in that flat who then has to bear that cost. It's not been the people who have enjoyed that 50 years within it. So it's quite a difficult thing because it costs a lot of money to replace a roof, right? Most people don't have that sort of money lying in their back pocket to pay for it. So there's a challenge there itself.
And fabric first is key for me. We've seen recently with the collapse of the tenement over in Pollock Shields, pretty catastrophic after 5 years of limbo. I think that was because of a misunderstanding of block insurance and how they were actually going to use that insurance to deal with the common repairs. I think some of the owners weren't insured, and it led to a logjam. The city was trying to broker the intervention of a local housing association. It's just really frustrating that weeks away from signing documents on that, the building itself collapsed with the recent heat wave. It's actually heat on the stone that caused it to finally give way and collapse into the street. So people have lost their property. They're still paying a mortgage on a non-existent property. And they're really struggling to deal with the insurance of it. So I think a lot of people buy these tenements in nice neighbourhoods like Shawlands, Pollock Shields, thinking this is great, aspirational, but they're buying into something they don't have a full awareness of the liabilities of, and not necessarily how to deal with that maintenance liability and how to be proactive about it. So much of it's reactive. And I know that I sit on the Tenement Maintenance Working Group in the Scottish Parliament, which has been running for about 10 years now. And the solutions are obvious. The common sinking fund tied to the building rather than the owner. The 5-yearly kind of MOT building inspection, ideally with someone with a conservation, if it's a heritage building, someone with a conservation accreditation, so they're able to speak with authority on it. And then you're looking at how do you address the maintenance liability you discussed. So how do we patiently finance it? So people are not having to necessarily remortgage or have to deal with a big one-off hit. How do you say, well, the life cycle of a roof's 30 years for 50 years? How do we loan finance that in a way which allows that fabric to be addressed, but then can be paid gradually over the life cycle of the work by the building owners collectively? And I think that would help to solve a lot of those problems, but it's getting the right infrastructure in place to do that financially. How do you administer it? What's the role of the factor in that? What's the obligations on the factor? And how are they held accountable in a regulatory sense to deliver good quality outcomes? Some of the RSLs are under a different regulatory framework with the Scottish Housing Regulator, and there's a bit more transparency in that respect. So it would be interesting to see how we, look at that model and benchmark it and see if we can have something similar where there's a you said we did and there's a clear quality standard that people are meeting. And if it's challenging for the sector, then we need to figure out how we finance that properly, because a lot of people are not want to take on the burden administratively of managing a block and having owners associations. You're not going to get a co-op in every close. You're going to have to think of ways of doing that at scale. Whether that's for the Glasgow's got a lot of these small micro housing associations that might be well suited to. There's about 80 of them in the city. There might be roles for the likes of Wheatley, Sanctuary in that space as well. But you've also got the private operators in the factoring space as well that can offer that service. But the question arises, how are we assured of the quality of the outcome?
Yeah. Any point? Anything on that, David?
No, you covered a lot of the things that are going on that we're involved in. Obviously, the tenement maintenance working group that we're feeding into on a regular basis. They're taking that, understandably, as government normally do, taking it one step at a time. So they're concentrating at the moment on the owners' associations and trying to get that legislation put through. Do I think that will solve the problem? No. I think it just creates another layer of administration on top of what's already there, because a lot of title deeds already account for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
The next on there is the sinking funds.
Yeah.
That comes in three parts, or you've got three types of costs there. You've got the historical work that needs done. So if you were to go and survey a tenement, it's going to come back and say it needs £300,000 worth of work immediately. You've then got the next 5 to 10 years of maintenance, and then you've got the ongoing maintenance. So each one of those comes with a cost, and it's trying to,
and there's perverse incentives, because I know there's a few cases in Glasgow where people have had surveys carried out to qualify for grant funding, and then they've realised the liabilities are huge, and then they can't sell. So they're trapped, and that actually creates a reluctance. It's almost like a kind of, put your head in the sand sort of attitude. Like, let's pretend the building's okay.
And people are living in tenements differently than they did 40 years ago. 40 years ago, they were staying for 40 years. Now they're staying for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, so they don't have that long-term incentive.
And they were never built for split ownership either. I mean, they were built as investment vehicles, almost the original build-to-rent product. So the plot of land was bought by a single owner, and 8 flats were usually built on the footprint. And then that was an investment vehicle for the daughter of a rich landlord of some kind.
Because it was meant it was rented.
Well, that's the foundation. That was the start of the foundation of your public image of factoring, because in those times the factor collected the rent, and demanded the rents, and you had wartime where people are off fighting the war, and the landlords instructing factors to go in and demand rents off stuff. So that was all what it was originally for. It was individual landowners.
It's an interesting part of Glasgow's social history that original impetus to have the Rent Restrictions Act of 1915, the kind of Mary Barber rent strikes, introduced a rent control that maintained right up to 1989. But what happened was those classic inner city districts like Govan, Springburn, Partick, Denniston, the fabric of those properties started to deteriorate at a really, really dangerous level, because no work was being done on them, because there was no incentive to maintain the building. So by the time you got to the 1950s and 60s, there was a real problem with slum housing in those inner city districts. Glasgow Corporation had been building Moss Park, Ridley, Knightswood, these model garden suburb municipal housing estates. So no one had really dealt with the tenement problem until it came to a head in the 1960s with the mass demolition of over 100,000 tenements. 1971, I think it was, there's a peak year for demolition in Glasgow. We had over 10,000 homes demolished in 1 year in the city. So it was an extreme consequence. And then with the 1974 Housing Act, the introduction of the community housing associations, which are now 50 years old, there was the housing action areas, the grants to renovate the buildings, put indoor toilets in them, and clean all the soot off the sandstone, etc., which gave rise to this kind of renaissance in Glasgow. But now we're reaching a point where a lot of the repairs were actually quite shoddy and basic. There's a classic notorious problem with lino stone, where rather than cleaning the stone, they just smeared adhesive on it and blasted sand at it. So it's created this kind of, it's like turkey teeth for stonework, where the stone's actually rotted away, and the veneers are all now falling off these buildings. So all across Glasgow, if you look around at the sandstone, you'll start to see this blistering. And these are causing problems because the sandstone behind it is water damaged. It's corroding
just
badly.
been patching over.
So I think the city is estimated around £3 billion liability altogether across all this housing stock. So, I mean, I don't think people are buying these flats with any knowledge of that liability. The home report is certainly not reflecting that.
The old stage 3 surveys are dead, where you did go and get a full survey of a tenement, and that showed you all of these things. Now, as you say, it's just a home report.
That's because people don't understand that. They just think a home report's a survey. They don't want cost there. And I mean, we had this conversation on another podcast, and we'll get on to the buying and selling bit of how that works and things like that as well. But they're choosing a sofa and choosing their bed and choosing their paint colours.
They'll happily pay for a new kitchen and a new bathroom, but the idea of doing the stonework might not be as appealing.
But also when they're going through the sale process or the purchase process, they're that's to my solicitors deal with. You know what I mean? They're thinking about the joy of it rather than actually the transaction, I think, a lot of the time as well. So are they sleepwalking into a problem? I don't know.
But back to your original question, who's responsible for it? And ultimately it is the owners of the buildings that are in it. It's just how that can be facilitated, both financially, both getting the groups together.
And the offers over scheme in Scotland, again, creates this arms race where lots of people are buying these flats way above the valuation, even at the home report, never mind the liability. So, I think there's plenty of money churning around the system, but it's very inefficiently allocated at the moment. And there does need to be something of a correction, particularly around these traditional tenements, about actually, right, how do we have a check on this?
With the 5-yearly maintenance regime, if that is legislated for, should start to do that. Because you'll then have, well, what standard is this gold? Whether it's gold, silver, bronze, and that would do something about it. The flip to that is the arguments that we hear is that's against human rights. You're then entering into these human rights arguments. Not sure I get that, but
it actually comes from the European Court of Human Rights was incredibly anti-communist. So property rights are incredibly strong under the European human rights legislation, because it's around things like there's been recent discussions about compulsory sale orders, for example. If people are sitting in derelict buildings and not selling them on, leaving them dilapidated, there should be a compulsion on the state to force the owner to sell up. But again, it comes back to this concern about property rights being completely sacrosanct and a cornerstone of capitalist society. So any infringement on these rights can be seen as fundamental.
A huge amount of developers buy something and don't develop it for 2 or 3 years until the value's gone up, right? Because they've overpaid for it and they're not going to get the right return on it until they do that. So there's a lot of derelict or unused or vacant properties.
1,000 football pitches worth of derelict land in Glasgow, and enough empty floor space in Glasgow city centre to fit out 9,000 housing units, flats.
Right.
Enough to fill the Empire State Building in New York. It's nuts when you think of the underutilisation and a housing crisis in our midst. It really feels like, if you look at it, we've got a housing demand signal. We've got vast amount of underutilised property currently built, never mind needing to build new, and vast amounts of wasted payments and temporary accommodation for people to live in homeless shelters, etc. All those numbers should be zero in an ideally efficient economy. So how do you find the right system to get that to get as close to zero as you can?
Just one thing before we move on. Paul, you've kind of suggested that there's regulation on the housing association side, but there's not as much. So how do you make sure a factor does a job as well as an RSL, housing association? David, you get any comment on that?
Private sector regulation tends to not be as stringent as public and housing association, but
that doesn't mean the factory market don't want to do a good job and do
I
best
would
for
say
their
that
clients.
the factory industry in the lead up to the Property Factors Act were fully on board and really inputted into it. Certainly Property Managers Association Scotland at the time were heavy inputters into the way the legislation was set out. And when it was brought in, it is fairly comprehensive when you dig down into what is required and what a homeowner can ask for, what they're required to get. It is fairly comprehensive, and there are serious consequences if you do not do what you're meant to do and abide by those rules. At the end of the day, it's a criminal offence if you get to the end of the road with a first tier tribunal. So there is stringent regulations. Are some of them missed? As in anything, yes, they will be, but I would tend to say that on the majority, from our experience of the things that are being found in the regulations or the first tier cases, they're vastly to do with poor communication and that kind of thing. They're not, arising from deceit or that kind of thing. It tends to be mistakes are getting made or poor communication. So in that sense, when you look at the numbers, it seems to actually be working. And there is a lot of secondary legislation for homeowners that actually was better utilised, would actually complete the circle. As such, that's the end we come from is, sometimes it's better utilising the legislation for the homeowners that's there, and that will bring everyone together better.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point because there are signals that something isn't working well as it could. So, for example, an increase in the number of tribunal disputes. The casework signals that I'm getting, and colleagues share that across the parties. And I mean, you get complaints about RSLs, you get complaints about private factors,
sure.
But at least you can see with the annual reports from the regulator that each housing association has a response time and it's monitored, and there's certain visibility of that, which I think it would be helpful to see a bit more of across the sector, regardless of whether it's private or public.
When you say sorry to interrupt, when you say like, you mean as in factors publicising these things more often?
Yeah. So
because they're there, so the timescales and all that are part of the legislation. So
so it would be good to just have those annual reports to say, well, each registered factor, they publish a service level, performance level, and the KPIs are all visible each year.
Yeah.
And if there are outliers, then that can form a basis of like, well, what's going wrong in that particular housing estate? Is it a local authority to intercede? Is there some issue about the design of it? Is there some issue with disruptive owners that aren't performing in their role in terms of cooperation with their neighbours, etc.? At least it gives us an understanding of what's at the root cause of the problems.
Yeah, because I mean, one of the things you stated, and I mean, just reading what was in this article, that there was profiteering behaviour and these sort of things. Where when I look at, certainly, I mean, so the reason I do this podcast is because we have a software company that provides. I mean, there's about 750,000 factors properties in Scotland. About that, our platform manages about 450,000 of them, and there's nothing in our software that allows anything dodgy to go on. Do you know what I mean? So there's nothing. These guys charge a fee for what they do. The way they get income is all listed within their written statement of service, and RSLs need to do them, housing associations need to do them, as well as property factors do. And I think one of the things that was commented certainly in the April 4th or 6th, I can't remember which one, article was factors looking to do short-term repairs rather than long-term maintenance to fix the problem. Okay. Now, I don't know the reason I mean, you have to go out and ask the owners of a property whether they want to pay for the fix and whether they want to do the fix to begin with. And I guess that might have an impact on that. Do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, I think when you look at that, I think from a factoring point of view, to get a group of owners to do full-scale repairs and long-term maintenance, if you think about that on the long run, reduces the admin for the factor. So it's better for them, so to do short-term repairs all the time means that more admin, more labour is required for the same fee, because the fee's normally a fixed set of fees. So from our point of view, absolutely, we'd love every single building that we're involved in to have a full survey, put in a maintenance plan, and just you then know where you've got to go and get to.
Yeah.
But you're right, these things still happen where, sometimes short-term repairs are done and it might be a mistake, or it's the wrong route they've went down, or it's simply that a group of owners don't want that, or a minority of them want it and the rest don't. So
it's also preventative as well as reactive. I mean, the issue, for example, I was driving along Alexandra Parade yesterday and spotted an oriole, like a corner oriole bay on the tenement was all braced with timber shoring.
Okay.
I was like, oh God, that's going to be terrible if that falls into the street right opposite Alexandra Parade train station. It's a lovely tenement block. But again, the root cause of that was a lack of gutter cleaning, because you could see all the staining down the front of the building. And it's like, well, what was going on there? I don't know who factors that property, but it's just like that lack of ongoing maintenance is a real challenge. And there's certain technological solutions out there. I was actually up at Glasgow University meeting this guy who is in the civil engineering department, and he's created this really nifty little high pressure hose system that can just run along a gutter
and clean it.
And or it has little brushes inside it as well. You can literally just attach a drill bit to the wall with a transmission line up the wall and just zap it with a drill, and it'll fire all the stuff out the gutter. So you don't even need to use like high reach equipment or anything. So there are potentially technical solutions out there. It's how do you scale it up? It feels like the whole landscape, particularly in the Glasgow setting, is so fragmented. How would you roll that out at scale across the city? How would you then have a preventive maintenance regime, getting the budley off of the stonework, getting the gutters cleaned, making sure these emerging issues are dealt with very early on before you reach a point where stonework's cracking, bay windows are going to collapse into the street, or chimneys going to fall in. and dealing with maybe the legacy of old repairs like concrete tiles rather than slates, the weight that has on the roof, etc. These are all things we need to really look at, and I think the point about behavioural effects is that people don't know how to finance this. And you could maybe look at, maybe it's not the best example to use, but I was going to say the car dealership model, where you can say, right, well, we can patiently finance this over a long-term period.
PCP'd.
I don't know if PCP is the right product to talk about.
Don't mention Klarna.
But even if there were, a state housing bank or some sort of system in place to allow every factor to intercede with their owners and say, look, well, this is roof repair has been specified by a approved contractor. The life cycle guarantee is 30 years. We can give you the finance for the roof works over a 30-year period, and that can then go through the sinking fund. That would allow for the owners to have the confidence to say, yeah, well, we can get that done, in the right way up front, rather than saying, I don't know how I'm going to find 20 grand to contribute to this.
Which is effectively what happens.
But I think absolutely. But I think in practice, a lot of these things are happening at the moment, across the board. So predominantly where properties are factored, and you've maybe got 6 or out of 8 in a tenement have said, right, we want to do this. It's £1,000 a head, and we want to go ahead. And there'll be property factors out there who will be funding that default for a period of time, using their own funds to do so, based on the knowledge that it's a properly made decision. They've got the legislative backing of the owners to do the job. They'll do the job, and then they'll try and pursue that owner. For the ones that can't pay, not won't pay, the ones that can't pay, most factors, again, will be trying to work out, okay, how do we help these people, whether it's letting them pay it up over a year. We can't do it over 12 months, otherwise we become a lending facility. So we're trying to work out ways to do that.
Right.
So the ones that, but the minority of ones are different, where you might have people that just don't want to pay, and are deliberately avoiding paying, for the repairs.
I think that's where there is a space to look at legislation again, where it's obligations on owners. That been very clear at the outset of becoming a custodian or owner of this building. And then how would a factor, it can't be a lender, it can't be this kind of financial.
But it can be just now. If that was what was required of these type of things, I would say probably you're better separating it, and having specific lending companies for that purpose.
So how would we, create a specialist banking facility in Scotland that would be specialised? Because I mean, it is a sufficiently large and enough demand to justify.
It's a big enough
specialist financial product, but one that's regulated to a level where it's not going to be exorbitant interest rates. It's going to be subsidised perhaps by the government. To allow it to charge a patient rate, almost like a student loans company for housing repairs. And you can secure that against the property's value. And the thing is, like, I'm on the board of the Glasgow City Heritage Trust, and we occasionally will grant. I mean, it's we only have around about just under £1 million a year to dispense in grants to listed buildings that are at risk and to carry out fabric repairs. That's often targeted in the more deprived parts of Glasgow, where the land values are less and there's more challenges, often public buildings or community buildings. But occasionally we will have a tenement that's needing a new roof or something like that, and it's a listed tenement. And my thinking is, I mean, infamously, actually just up the hill from here, the Trinity Towers.
Which had that problem.
Which was a total mess. And ended up with the owners, some of them facing bankruptcy, massive mental health crisis, in some cases, really, really problematic welfare issues there. And essentially them being 300 grand in a conservation deficit with this tower teetering above them. I mean, that's maybe the more extreme example, but nonetheless, it showed how bad the current infrastructure is to help with these properties. And this was potentially Glasgow losing an iconic A-listed landmark in the city. So really, at the end, we had to step in with the HAS to fund that, But often I then think, well, we've done all these repairs. It's been grant funded by the government, the public, and then all the residents will benefit from the uplift in the valuation of their properties, and then they will often very immediately afterwards sell on to make a profit.
There's a couple for sale now at the moment.
So I mean, that is a concern. Not particularly that case with the Trinity Towers per se, but I've just seen it on and off over the years, where you'll see like that tenement was grant funded, and then all of a sudden you see the for sale signs appearing, and they're making an immediate
absolutely.
quick buck off of it.
Uh-huh.
So I think, well, the government's already subsidising, or the public's already subsidising private profit. Surely we'd be better recycling that through a patient loan scheme, rather than grant funding stuff that then we never get back.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, the other thing is about, I mean, a factor has got, I mean, there's, you can't bankroll a development. Do you know what I mean? You know what I mean? No. So, you can't, finding ways to get someone to pay something off over 12 months is effectively you bankrolling that person. And, there's a whole load of, that takes you down a completely another route on clients' money, conversations, and all of these sort of things.
I think most factors will be doing that on the basis of their knowledge of the owners at the time. They're not be saying, right, there's someone here that just won't pay. At that point, they're saying that there is nothing left here. There's no float left. There's, this person's not paying. There's not. But if it's okay, there's some people find themselves in the position they can't pay for once, or it's a very moving, as you know, it's a moving. Owners change frequently. It's a moving. People's circumstances can change from month to month. So that's all based on an experience of the fact they're saying, right, well, I think we'll be okay to get this, so we'll press on. But there's many that say I can't because one or two people have just.
It feels like that's an immediate short-term issue we need to overcome with this glut of repair liabilities that certainly we have in Glasgow and across Scotland. But if we did finally get in place the building inspections and the sinking funds, you would be able to anticipate that this building will need a roof repair in 10 years. So let's start making sure that balance is up there.
And our argument was almost to get they're looking at owners associations, sinking funds, and then maintenance inspections. And we've been kind of saying, let's bring the maintenance inspections forward, because let's know the extent of the problem. To then allow us to say, okay, well, the sinking fund needs to be X. We thought it needed to be Y, but we've now done the inspections, so it needs to be X. And now, how do we get to X?
And that's a much easier product for a financial house to actually deal with, because you can say, well, this building's liabilities are whatever, so we can fund the sinking fund. They can apply the loan to that for the overall package of work needing done, and that will then be paid down over a 50-year period or whatever.
And does it deal with the issue you've just talked about? Values going up dramatically. If you've got that there, that's going to stabilise that situation as well.
Exactly.
To a degree, but the problem is the heart of the ones that are halfway through a sale, and then the survey hits the door, and that's the heart.
There's no good time to do it, really. But I guess
you got to do it at some point.
It should have been yesterday.
Exactly.
It always needs to be yesterday.
It should have been yesterday.
Okay, right. We need to move on. So let's talk about inherited debt, transparency, and responsibilities during conveyancing. This has been, I've spoken on a couple of podcasts that haven't got out yet, but will go out before this one. We've spoken about this quite a lot. So the Times article on the 4th highlights cases where homeowners were asked to pay off debts linked to previous owners. So we need to in fact, David, you can pick this up. How does inherited debt happen, and how common is it in your experience?
When you say inherited debt,
I'm talking about debt. So the article spoke about someone who
has bought into a property,
so let me just find it here. So there was a whole load of debt run up before Mr. Stevenson purchased a 2-bed property. They'd never been mentioned in the conveyancing process, and he was liable to 4,200 quid. Okay, so it was a problem at purchase.
Right. I'm not 100% sure how that arises.
Right. Okay.
In the aspect that since the 2004 Housing Scotland Act, you've had the NOPL. So where there's a growing debt on a flat, I would expect the property factor to register a notice of, or any other homeowner to register a notice of potential liability against that property.
Okay.
Which then during the sales transaction should be highlighted by a solicitor. And in our experience, if there's £3,000 owed by the outgoing, that is simply deducted from the purchase price, and it's a swap over. And that's from an inherited point of view.
But if it's not if it's not that property that's being sold though, and the debt is another property in the development, and this is spread debt, if you like. Now the argument on here was that there's no there's no provision in the title deed to spread the debt. Okay, but that doesn't matter because of the Tenement Scotland Act, because it allows it in certain circumstances for it to be done. And therefore, if it's in a written statement of service, then it can be done anyway. But it can be done because of the Tenement Scotland Act, obviously. So in that instance, how does the buyer not find out that there's in this instance 16,000 quid by one owner, and then suddenly the factor decides to spread it over the rest of the parties?
We've got the conveyancing process is probably the best, the place that should come out. Again, the Scottish standard clauses were changed a number of years back, and forming part of that became the Property Standardisation Group's conveyancing letter, which is a series of about, I think it's 11 points.
It is.
Which is questions that the buyer, I'll say homeowner and the solicitor, because when the solicitor acts for them, they are the homeowner, they're acting on behalf of the homeowner, so they should be behaving like they are the owner.
Okay.
So they should be asking that question of the seller through the seller's solicitor, and those 11 questions tend to then be asked by the owner of the property through the solicitor to the property factor.
Okay.
Of those questions, there tends to be repairs, contemplation done, waiting to be invoiced, but also, is there any debt outstanding on the property that this owner could be responsible for? Okay. So at that point in time, you would expect the answer to be 0, no, or a figure.
It is quite surprising because, I mean, I remember when I moved into my flat about 2015, I think it was, and it's a housing association factor. You would just get the invoice through for close cleaning and the common lighting and stuff like that. There were a couple of things, and you're like, I didn't know that was there was maybe like a negative, a deficit against my flat of a couple hundred quid or something like that.
Okay.
I just set up a kind of direct debit.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a big deal, but it just came through from the housing association a few weeks after moving in. So I hadn't had any prior discussion about that.
Yeah, so in that circumstance, if that question is asked of the factor by the seller,
but that is a question that's one of the 11 that's
one
in
of the 11.
that document. Yes. That's the property.
Yeah,
what do you call it? Property Standardisation Group asked the question.
Yeah, it's actually question 10. So advise whether there are any unpaid charges or debts which may be recoverable under any provision in any of the conditions. So that's really what's covering in that. So I suppose the answer is, if the factor goes back with the debt, the seller should go back to the homeowner with that debt.
Yeah.
Through
their solicitor.
And therefore, if that incoming homeowner arrives and there is a debt, then the process, my understanding of the process would be back to the solicitor to pursue the outgoing homeowner for recovery of that, because it's the homeowner that is given that information to the solicitor. Now, the homeowner might then have a case to argue with the property factor if the property factor is given the wrong information or not given the right information, but that pathway is there. So if that's happened, no owner should be coming in if that question's been asked without having an answer to it.
Okay.
It's how that, but again, it's back to your question about, is that explanation being understood? It's probably been delivered by the solicitors, but has it been fully taken in? As we've talked about in that joyous purchasing process, are we really thinking of these things at that
maybe
point?
People are just blinded by the euphoria of it. It's the biggest investment you're ever going to make.
Absolutely.
So perhaps people are, it needs to be much clearer, and maybe there is a need to look at how that process works to make it more assured.
I mean, that process at the moment is not in law, is it? That's a standard that people adhere to. They said this 11 questions. When did that come in?
Well, at least 6, 7, 8 years ago. Yeah, at least. I would suggest that most solicitors that we, as a private entity, receive. We deal with maybe 5,000 sale transactions in a year from my own business. I would say 99.9% will have these questions asked of us.
I mean, if it is,
but it depends what the answer is as well.
It's one of the things that, if you feel there's good practice, which isn't statutory, but maybe ought to be, and it wouldn't be particularly onerous on all actors, it would just flush out those who don't do it well.
Absolutely.
Then maybe there is a case for that to be amendments to the housing bill.
And to add on to that, the sharing of debt, in our experience, is a highly unusual. It's the kind of position of last resort.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen very often. I would say it's
maybe also something that ought to be factored into home reports.
Yeah.
It does seem like the home report is a flawed product.
That is.
When it comes to pretty flatted property.
Yeah.
Because the building fabric and envelope isn't really being fully assessed. But then again, maybe there's another aspect around common liabilities.
Well, I think
you can answer the question, do you have a factor to I don't know?
Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, there is, but that's a part of the home report that's being, and I had to do it myself a few weeks ago. That's being asked of the homeowner.
Absolutely.
Do you have a factor? Yes. What are the? I mean, and the amount of. I mean, I'm looking for a flat at the moment. And the amount of home reports that I read when I look at that section. I mean, I've been in property factoring software for 26 years. Yeah, I understand how the process works. We've got. The reason I do this podcast is just because I service this industry from a software point of view, and so many of the people in this industry I know, and I look at the answers and go, that's pretty shockingly crap. Yeah, the actual bit that's being filled in. So it was actually the surveyor who had to go and ask these questions and ask the right questions as part of the home report process that they are doing. Then I'm sure you would get far better answers within that section.
It's really concerning to hear that, because I mean, behind that ultimately will be a big wake-up call for someone. If that quality hasn't been addressed, if that assurance isn't there around maintenance, it will culminate in a big debt or a big cost to the owner, or the actual failure of the building in terms of its fabric, and then potential homelessness.
Yeah,
I mean, it's shocking. I mean, and people don't really realize what they're in for when a building control officer turns up at their property and tells them they've got 15 minutes to grab their stuff and get out for an indeterminate period. I mean, they don't realize how draconian that. I mean, probably necessarily for the sake of preservation of life, but there's been certain cases in Glasgow recently where the building control officer turned up and said, right, get your stuff, get out, and they're out for 6 months.
Yeah.
It happened when the art school went on fire. It happened recently in Bridge Street in Lauriston. It's happened more recently over in Carlton when an old pub underneath a flat basement fell through.
Yeah.
And the whole block were evacuated and they're still out their houses now.
Yeah.
I was personally involved in one of these at Bottom of Byers Road.
Yeah, I know the one.
In Dumbarton. It was I remember vividly Saturday, 12 o'clock, I was on the golf course and I got a phone call to say building control had just evicted everyone.
This is Dolphin Pub, was it?
Yeah, the Dolphin Pub, and we arrived down and all the homeowners were out in their pajamas. There was homeowners that were away abroad, and they'd never get into their house for 2 years. They weren't allowed back into their house.
I actually had to email the head of building control last year to plead with them to let a guy into his flat for 10 minutes under supervision to get his passport so he could vote.
Yeah. Wow.
He did in the end, just thankfully, but
because in that circumstance they didn't. They just there was passports left and everything. Wow. They didn't let them in at all. And when they eventually got back in, they had to throw out fridges and all that because it was horrific,
horrendous. And that's sat in limbo for a couple of years at least.
2 years.
Yeah.
2 years.
I mean, we can't have that carrying on. We really need to get something sorted about a backstop for the fabric first of buildings. Just get in, get it done, and then we can deal with the financial aspects of it later. Who's absorbing that upfront cost?
Yeah.
That's the challenge we need to address through some sort of state finance product.
How do you feel about this mixed with you've also got the single open call on for the kind of external wall fabric issues that are on at the moment, where the government are involved in funding the single building assessments. And this is a question I've raised a couple of times to say that, there's other buildings in the country that are in a far worse and dangerous position, but we're not doing something on an emergency basis like that at the same time, in conjunction and saying we have these tenements that are in a serious condition. Yeah, there's a different reason sometimes why. Yeah, when there is some that happen that's unforeseen, but others one is they've just not maintained it, which is different to the external fabric thing. It's not a maintenance issue, but
no, you're right. I think there's a real lack of awareness and sense of urgency from government, particularly around the tenement stock. I mean, Scotland was largely built between 1850 and 1920. I mean, the inner cities are all built during that period. It's a period of huge population growth. And it's a bit like the rings on a tree. They're there and they're permanent. And if we don't deal with the looming liabilities of that building stock, we've got the oldest building stock in Europe.
Yeah.
How are we going to address it? we're going to potentially lose the character of our cities if we're not careful. You know, it could be mass failure, and all the implications financially, emotionally, psychologically that could have. It could be carnage. I mean, I've already seen microcosms of it around the city. It's not pleasant for people, and I don't think anyone can foresee in that moment of euphoria when they're moving into a lovely tenement building, that's going to be a world of pain for them in a few years. In this, you know, in some cases. So I think it's a cruel deceit, and I think you know, everyone's got a role to play in trying to get the process better. And in my view, it's fabric first. How do we provide the financial underpinnings for that? I think the recommendations from the tenant maintenance working group and the outputs of that are clear about the need for the reviews, the reports, the fabric condition, the common sinking funds, the owners associations, fine. But ultimately, we need to have some sort of financial underpinning to it that all parties can access. And it's about maintaining long-term value, because it's no one's interest to see a building collapsing.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
And as we've always said, there's factors when there's buildings. You know, so if the buildings remain standing, they'll always require assistance. You know, so from our point of view, you know, we are passionate about getting these things maintained and up to a maintenance standard, because it's just a longevity of business for the people that we employ.
And it's also good for our skills. And, you know, like, even if you want to look at a broader economic benefit, you know, if I've got a really consistent demand signal for, say, stonemasonry, and it allows the stonemasonry trade to take. I've only got about 100 stonemasons in Scotland at the moment. I mean, it's shockingly bad. I've got some really key skills around like lead working and roofing and stuff like that are at risk. I actually was on a call earlier today about Ballantyne's Castings, which is one of only 2 remaining cast iron foundries in Scotland that's gone into liquidation, and about how they've got all the old historic cast iron patterns in Scotland. I mean, it's stuff like that. You know, one business failing can suddenly collapse a whole industrial ecosystem. So I think the broader thing is, if we can get a stable demand signal to say, right, rolling tenement maintenance repairs going through Glasgow, for example, you know, it's almost like a Formula One pit stop team that are just rolling through the streets doing, you know, gutter repairs, stone cleaning, stone treatment, and also dealing with structural issues as they arise. The cost of that will reduce. The opportunities for young people to do training and these kind of skills will increase. The opportunities for business growth are there as well on the contractor side. You know, it's a virtuous cycle. Right now we just have this really ragged reactionary approach to it all, which is really not satisfactory.
No. And what's tied into that is debt again. In terms of, you know, the Scottish legal system, in terms of how hard it is to actually try and recover money from people who don't want to pay. You know, and that's another problem. Likes of that, you're talking about putting in rolling regimes of repair. I might be speaking out of turn, but I can't see any factor not wanting and seeing that as a great process. If, you know, and we're talking about this funding, if factors could be assured that, you know, when that 1 or 2 people decide they're not paying, that the system to get that recovery, that would then help that cycle of recovery and cycle of repair.
It'd be interesting to see how we design that, because I guess creating that account that is tied to the tenement building would help as a sort of legal personality. And then if one of the contributors to that fails to meet their obligations, then they'll be held liable for that outstanding.
Because at the moment, that's very, very difficult, isn't it? It's very, very difficult to recover debt.
And as in every system, you have people who play the game, they'll get it to a point, they'll do that. But yes, you know, trying to recover, you know, what can be relatively small amounts of money, you know, it might be £5, it might be £600 that you're trying to recover, but that's a big amount of money for that individual tenement when they're trying to get works done. You know, so it's trying to recover these things, you know, and, you know, if you want to take somebody to court for £600, it can end up costing you £400, and you've still not recovered the £600, and you're a year before you recover the 600. You know, so it's.
But when you think about six flats in a tenement, you know, I mean, let's not go into fees here, but you've got 6 people, your income is your fee, your outgoings is all of the work. If you've got a couple of people not paying £600, your fee's gone down the toilet. You're not getting, you know, that's your fee gone. So who is funding the rest of that money?
Yeah, well, that's it, because the factoring fee tends to be around about, and I know the TPI looked at England and Wales. I've not done Scotland yet, which they'll probably do because TPI Scotland's fairly new. But they looked at the average percentage of what the actual fee was compared to the cost to maintain a building, and it's round about 6%.
In England and Wales.
In England and Wales. And I would imagine it's probably the same or less in Scotland.
Yeah, okay. Because I mean, certainly from a software sales point of view, it's useful to know what your potential clients are making, and certainly fees in England tend to be a lot higher than fees in Scotland. Now there may be other reasons for that, like the insurance commission and all these sort of things, but yeah.
Well, no, it's down in England and Wales. It's predominantly form fees. There's a lot of if you want a pet and you're a leaseholder down south, you need to pay £200 to get a form to get a pet. Yeah. So a lot of that is where their fees, which they're trying to tackle with the Leasehold Reform Act down south. That's what they're trying to tackle. But I think that's where their fees look a bit. There
is a question about fees for everything else.
And of course, the state has a role in this because huge amounts of government money go in the form of housing benefit to rents. So the state has a lot of skin in the game as it is.
So to make sure.
I think there is a more rigorous role we could play in this, and to your point about accountability, having that visibility of, well, here was the expenditure and the income against this block, and here's the rate of recovery against that, and it's much easier to plan that over a decade-long cycle rather than simply suddenly the roof fell in and we need to fix it.
I have another question before I ask it.
Sure. Sorry.
No, it's all right. Don't worry.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. There we go.
David, can you shift yours that way a bit? Okay, so sorry, I went to move that. Right. So one other thing, just before we get off the conveyancing one, that those 11 questions, we were having a chat about this the other day before this podcast, and we came across in conversation a situation where those questions would not pick something up. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me that again on here?
The scenarios where, for instance, there was a building survey done of a property and it was 2 years ago, but the owners have decided they're not doing anything about it. So it's £200,000 worth of work, and the owners have just taken a decision, as some do, no, we're just going to park that. That will not be picked up in that sale question because the question's not asked. So the buyer will ask I can't remember the wording of it, but they'll say, confirm details of any common building defects, maintenance issues or pending matters of which you're aware where estimates are being obtained for consideration by the proprietors. Mm-hmm. So that's the question being asked. So that's the question that the seller will ask of the property factor, and they'll say, well, no, there is nothing, because the answer to that question, which is what the solicitor tends to want, is there is nothing under consideration at the moment.
Right.
And that's
it's sophistry. Yeah.
And in previous years, and we're talking years and years and years ago before this, there has been companies taken to task for answering questions they weren't asked. Right. It sounds ridiculous, but that is so. And that kind of thing, there are things that can be missed, and that's why, as you say, legislating or making statutory questions a requirement is probably the way to go in that.
Okay. But most people follow this. So, I mean, this is probably 90% fit for purpose. There's just a couple of things in here that just won't be picked up.
Or might not be. You might find that the most fact will just give everything anyway, because that's why not? You want them to know what's coming. But
there's a potential.
But there's a potential that if you're being asked a standard question, that the person getting the letter, because it's not, you might have staff that are doing the job that are just answering the questions, are looking on the system to pending stuff, what's in the go, where have we asked for estimates, so they're not aware to look somewhere else. They might have started a year ago, and that's dead in the water, so it's closed off, so they're not going and looking at closed repairs or closed things. So it's not necessarily it's just not being asked, so nobody's looking in the right area to find out, is there something? I would say that the outgoing homeowner has a duty and a responsibility to make that aware, the same way when they're filling in their home report, they've got a duty to answer the questions, so they should be saying, oh, we did have a survey. Yeah. They're not doing that. Well, not all of them are doing it, but they should be doing that. But kind of firming up in that and making it clear that all of the things that, whether you go back 5 years for, and it tends to be major stuff, you might be looking at things that are over £500 a head. So if it's something, a repair that would cost an individual £500, that's what they're looking for. Right. They're not looking for something where you might have £100 repair. £100 repair. That's just general maintenance. What the solicitors are tending to look for is something that's going to cost my client a significant amount of money, and it tends to be over 500. And I think many factors will actually say that. So they'll actually say there's nothing over £500 per homeowner to give the solicitor the chance to come back and say, well, actually, we're getting it from 400, 300.
You know, because I mean, this really ought to be computed into the price signal for the property. You know, and if it clearly isn't, then it's a big moral hazard.
The maintenance. The maintenance inspections, because that would, you know, because that will be almost like the building MOT. You know, you look at New Zealand where their multi-occupant buildings have got a stamp on the outside of the door to say this was not MOT but MOT
the tax disc for buildings, basically.
Pretty much, and that's what they've got, and that's what their whole property eco market is based on. If you don't have that, you know, it's
absolutely food for thought, though. You know, because that's the whole point of having this conversation, right? I mean, we interviewed Mike Guthrie, who is a partner with Burness Paul, and he's got, I don't know if he chairs, but he's got an involvement in the property standardization group. So, you know, and he's sitting there going, you know, if there are, he's there. I mean, he draws up title deeds and deeds of conditions for developers and all of these sort of things. Now, that's got to be helpful for the homeowners, but it's also going to be helpful for the factors. The factors can actually manage the bloody buildings, you know. And everyone, okay, we couldn't remember in that podcast, but it was 10 or 11 questions. But you know, I think everyone's sitting there going, this is covering everything. And if it's not, then someone needs to get around the table and talk about it.
But you used the phrase poor actors, and I think the principle of trying to standardise it is to stop the ability for poor actors. You know, and I think, you know, questions like that one at 10 where it says, you know, where there's a debt with a provision in any deed of conditions. Now, a bad actor there can say, well, it's not in the deed of conditions, but it's actually over here in the Tenement Scotland Act. So in actual fact, they're still liable over here, but the question's not asking me the full extent of it. It should carry on and say, or any other legislation. You know, so that's assisting poor actors rather than, you know, because most of these problems will be solved. Because again, I think we're looking at the minority of issues where people aren't informed.
But that's what generates
the problems, absolutely,
and all of these sort of things. I mean, there's been, I read, is 11 people been written or struck off the factors register, and since it became a thing. So, you know, the majority of people who are actually providing a service are providing a good service. So,
and it's
I mean, you know, I think a good service is, you know, and I would say that they try and serve a good service, whether that is perceived as a good service is where the difficulties arise, because property management, factoring, whatever you want to do, is very strange, because it's not really, in one sense, business to customer, because the individual homeowner is only part of the customer. You know, that's when it becomes a bit.
It's the tragedy of the commons, isn't it? You know, that one person acting in their own selfish interest can sabotage the wider common good. And if the role of the factor is to be this kind of broker or interlocutor, then their role is conditional or dependent on everyone cooperating effectively. And if there isn't compulsion on owners and accountability for the factor, then that relationship can quickly fall apart. So I think there is a need to look at how we deal with that. And I think stability for all parties is what's needed.
100%. And a collaborated approach to it, rather than butting heads, as has always been the case for the last 10 years, is getting around and showing what each other can do for the greater good, you know, and working, and that will, in that sense, eradicate some of the problems.
I think you can start to see the solution emerging around, if the owners association is going to exist in this legal personality is engaged at the block level, that's then, you know, a legal personality that can be the financial account that the factor is dealing with.
I personally think they'll just take that and appoint somebody to do that, having looked at the suggested legislation as a if I was just a flat owner, I'm going to look at that and going, that's a lot of liability on me. You know, that's a lot of responsibility, you know, holding all these funds, being responsible for them, all these. So I think a lot of people will look to delegate that to whether it's a factor, whether it's a housing association, whether it's another party, or building managers, you know, because of the you know, they're then taking on all of the owners' responsibilities if they do it themselves, which is,
I think that's where you can start to see kind of patient loan structure underpinning it all, and that's how it could start to run much more efficiently and much more robustly about getting the fabric dealt with, and then we can pick up the liabilities with the individual owners.
Yeah. And it allows them to be an entity that can borrow money. That can do things like that, and you can look at things like the deposit scheme that's a centralised body. Great, we'll put it over there rather than if you don't trust the factor. If you don't trust the factor, put it over there.
And then it would be simple enough to say, well, when I'm going to buy a flat in this building,
how much is
there's an outstanding liability on the common funds which I need to factor into the pricing.
But all of these things are a good idea. They just need to be discussed and talked about and move forward. Okay, we are going to have to move forward because we are way over. But anyway, I've got 2 or 3 last questions. So in the article, and I'm not asking this because I just want to get you guys' views on it, right? So the homeowner had to pay a fee to use the portal that the factor provided. Okay, now that's not clearly one of my clients because nobody that I know or do business with charges that. And it comes back to the form filling fee and all of these sort of things. Any views on that as a concept? David, you can go first.
From a TPI point of view, I suppose I would suggest it's a matter of choice. As you say, I think most receivers of any service will pay within whatever their fee is for whatever tech they have availability to. I would suggest that most property management companies will pay a fee to use a portal in addition to what their normal service is. So do they pass that on to the homeowners as a commercial decision? I think the choice of the homeowners is, do I want, is it industry standard to pay a separate fee for a portal? Absolutely not, as far as I'm aware. But again, it's back to this, well, the homeowners should have the choice then to say, no, and we're going somewhere else or we're doing something else. And I don't know what the fee was or what the level, I don't know anything about that kind of thing. But in terms of the actual, I think most will pay for the tech that is used within their management fee. But it goes back to this choice of service provider.
Okay.
And again, it's back to that one where you might have a tenement of 8 who 7 of them are quite happy to pay that because they still believe the service that provider gives is better than any other service provider. But you might have one person that says, no, I'm not happy with that. Positive is they have redress through the first tier system to go and challenge that. But, sometimes it can be that one person that shouts louder than the 7 positive people. If that makes sense.
It just seems peculiar that you would paywall access to a critical service provider for the building. So I think the way in which that's described is bizarre. But
I would agree with that. The way it was
having a kind of Uber for buildings, if you like, or a kind of Just Eat for building maintenance is a good and logical thing to do. So you can kind of rapidly communicate and log issues or take photographs or whatever.
Very costly.
But then it's a case of how do you manage that, and maybe that is a case of, is there a role again for the state to open source some of that stuff, or to actually agree that there's a kind of standard procedure for how that works nationally? There's an agreement with a particular vendor, and that just becomes a national standard where everyone in Scotland that's the portal that they use for common maintenance. So it's an idea, but it's just one I'm throwing out there
I like the idea in one sense. In the other sense is there's still a huge proportion of homeowners out there that don't want anything to do with the portal.
Right.
We've got Tenements here that we've got a wide range. I think that's another issue with factoring is the demographic of customer base is so unbelievably wide. So you can have a tenant of 8 where 4 people are driving. They want everything done electronically on a portal, and you've got 4 who don't want anything done electronically. They want a bit of paper coming through their post, and they want to walk into an office and pay a check or still pay cash to pay for their service. So I think that's where it becomes quite a...
I think the thing is that it's a choice, right? So you provide a portal, obviously. I provide it to you. You pay me to use it. It's a bit of tech, right? And you absorb that in your management fee. But you don't make it mandatory that everyone uses it.
No,
the certainly the version that we have now, you can log jobs. It's a bit like Domino's, or where you're pizza's in the oven and you know when you're getting it, or the Amazon delivery, you know when the contract has been assigned, you know when the contract is going to get on site if they update that part of the portal. It does a full cycle stuff. But you're guaranteed that not 100. Well, I can tell you, not 100% of people you want to use it, because we have those sort of analytics that tell us, what people, how people log in and these sort of things, and you can create internal messaging within the client, the ownership of the tenement, and all of that sort of stuff. But I think the point here was that it's a mandatory charge. You don't get the choice. You have to pay for it. You have to use it.
Yeah, that's different. Absolutely. I don't believe there's anyone else doing that where you cannot communicate without.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Right. So one of the things to talk about very, very quickly. A couple of things we still need to cover. Right. The Times article suggested that the number of cases had jumped dramatically. From 26 in 2012, well, not too many people knew about the Act then, probably, to 330 last year. It's a real shame, actually, because there used to be a full report done every year of all of the cases and stuff like that. I'm not sure that gets done now. There's a very, very small part in a report somewhere that talks about it. So I did a bit of research, and I did this in May. And I looked at the figures for 2025. Now, this is not cases created. This is decisions. Okay, and there were 40 cases listed where there were decisions between January and May, but only 16 resulted in award against the property factor. So now I know you can't please all of the people all the time, obviously, and a lot of people are gonna be frustrated and want to go and get recourse from their factor or whatever. But I think you mentioned this earlier, a lot of them were down to communication. I have not responded back. I can give you, if you look there, I have not responded back within my SLA. Therefore, I am in breach of my my SLA, my written statement of service. What do you, David, some comment on that? I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is the Times said it's going up 330. It used to be 26, it's now 330. That means that's getting a lot worse. That was research I did.
Yeah, I think with technology and input, I think more access has been used with the first tier tribunal by homeowners. I think they're getting used to what is probably, although it's 2012, it's still probably relatively new, compared to the court tribunal system, which has been around for years, etc. So in terms of numbers, though, when we look at it, and we always try and put it into a bit of perspective, no factor wants to go to the first tier tribunal. In fact, probably no homeowner wants to go to the first tier tribunal. They try and get it resolved. We've got formalised complaints, which we have to have. We've got processes which we've got to give our customers and let them know it. We've got to follow those processes. And all the way through those processes, believe it or not, we are trying to resolve the complaint. Some complaints just aren't resolvable because it's just a difference of opinion, or it just isn't resolvable. They go to the first tier. The homeowners have that free access to a tribunal system, which is great and allows it. It's actually helped better people's understanding from both sides. So it's better the factors understanding of because we're able to. Sometimes you get complaints in and they're just all over the place. So the tribunal actually lets us narrow it down so that we actually can, it's easier to understand what the homeowner's complaint is. On the other side, it gives us, in fact, us the ability to say, okay, well, our understanding of that was wrong. Our interpretation of that was this, but it's now being interpreted as this. So they're the positives. In terms of the volumes going up, I believe that's partly to do with technology and the way the world is anyway, and the changes in terms of people are gaining more access and the ability to do these things. But when we look at this perspective, you talked of 730,000 factored customers and there's only 300 complaints going through the tribunal. We look at that quite positively. That's quite a positive number, especially when you compare it with the private rented sector. Private rented sector's numbers are in the, where are they? 312,000 private rented, but they've got 4,000 complaints going through the private rented sector. So there's a big difference, and that's one where it is business to customer. So it's a landlord to a tenant. Whereas factoring can be the person that is complaining is that one that's in the minority. So you've got to add that into it, that just will never be happy because it's actually their neighbours that want to do something, but the person sees, so in terms of that thing, we actually think that the tribunal system has worked really, really well. And it's just brought some, direction to complaints.
Yeah. And it probably reveals themes that can be addressed through better regulation, through better processes. If you say it's an impasse between the owners in a block, right, well, how do you solve that? Probably by not smacking them up front for a 10 grand, 20 grand liability, but then maybe creating a financial product which allows that to be patiently financed. That would change it would make it easier for that individual or all owners to get on board with the right standard of repairs. If it's things like I often get complaints from sort of the newer build housing estates that the landscaping's not maintained very well, or the grass cutting's not being done and stuff like that. And it's like, well, okay, in those scenarios, if it is a housing estate, should those collection of residents have the right to make a collective representation, rather than being individually?
Which they can do. They can do. It can be. They've all got to do them individually, which seems a bit silly. But they're then pulled into one case.
But that has increased the numbers over years as well, because you get 20 people with the same thing, and then suddenly your stats are reading 20. And
so if you could rationalise it into saying it's the same street, but they've got a common issue with that grass isn't getting cut, twice a year or whenever it's meant to be, as according to the agreement, or if it's about close maintenance or something like that, then allow that to be consolidated into one expression of frustration, and it can be arbitrated on the basis of this group and the factor, rather than it being atomized into different. I think if this seems more straightforward and logical to do it that way.
But the First Year Tribunal doesn't cater for that, does it?
Well, it caters on and what we've just said, whereas if you've got a building of 40 people and you have 25 people altogether, they've got to put them together as 25. But what tends to happen is they have one and they just replicate it and somebody else signs it.
Yeah.
But the tribunal then pull it all together. And it's one decision that covers all 25.
So it's like kind of administrative tidying up.
Yeah, absolutely. It's more of that. We can understand it if you
rather than here's a complaint from this group of people into the First Year Tribunal, which would be a lot easier.
Because I think a factor would be, we would actually favour that, because what we've seen is, and this is where it's a bit disjointed, the development of, was it 40 flats in Edinburgh, and we had one complaint because we did this, and it didn't think we should have done it, and we this complaint saying we should do it the opposite way, and they both went to the First Year Tribunal, and they both get different answers.
Really?
From the tribunal,
right?
Because they're entirely separate tribunals who can make their own decision on something, and then there's one, and they'll look at them, but there's no precedent set by them.
Can turn under a different.
So from a property factor, we would rather say, right, okay, let's look at this. Let's look at the initial. Bring in the rest of the owners if they share your opinion, because if they share your opinion, then we can do something. But if you're the only opinion, and the rest of your owners are happy with what's going on, it's very difficult to resolve that complaint. Whereas if we can bring everyone in, meet with the owners face to face, best way to deal with things. Most complaints tend to go away when you meet with people face to face.
The greatest problem with communication is the illusion that's happened.
Absolutely. So absolutely, that kind of thing would be brilliant. Because it would actually not just reduce your numbers in terms of, it would reduce your numbers, because you would have more people realising, my neighbours are share my feelings, which they don't know because I've never asked, or I'm actually an outlier. I might need to just accept that this is what I've signed up to, and this is what my neighbours want to do. So it's not actually a factoring issue; it's more to do with my neighbours, and I can go and press them until they think the same way as me.
It's the nature of democracy. You don't always get what you want.
It is.
And it's very rare that even a government will be elected with the support of the majority of the population.
So
I've seen a lot of misunderstanding, because it's the same with, we've seen a lot going through, and there's the committees about cost to go to tribunal and the cost to change factors and all that, which we don't quite understand. We've never seen this, because as far as there is no cost to change factor. There's very few cases. I don't think I've seen a case that has to go to court to change a factor. It tends to be done. So it's just trying to get that pulled together, that there's a better messaging system. And obviously I think the best messaging system you can have is a government's messaging system to come out and
And the challenge can be often if you are looking to change factor, if the fundamentals are so dysfunctional, such as the liability on the property, you might struggle to get a factor to take it on.
Absolutely.
That's my last question. I'm coming on to that in a minute. Just one thing on this. I mean, I think your example of the ground maintenance stuff, and I got a letter. I own a house in near Thornley Bank, and I don't live in it, but I got a letter through. Obviously, as the owner, the factor deals with me, and I got a letter through the other day to say that from the property manager to say they'd inspected the grounds maintenance. It was pretty bloody appalling. So they brought the contractor in and said, and I mean, this is a well-known contractor in Glasgow, in fact, probably Scotland, for doing this sort of work. Brought him in to say, look, this isn't good enough. Exited him, brought someone else in. Didn't charge us for the previous 3 visits because obviously it wasn't well done. So, there are ways to make these things happen, and it's down to, yes, the homeowners to make the factor aware of it, or for the factor to see it on an inspection, and then for something to happen about it. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I have one last question, and this is Labour is proposing amendments to the housing bill to make it easier to dismiss underperforming factors. We were just about to go there, so I thought I'd bring this up. What exactly do you want to see changed?
Well, I think it's about accountability for high standards, and that will drive competition and surely a better service level. So I think currently, from what I've understood, it can be quite difficult administratively for people to organise to hold a factor to account sometimes.
Okay.
Whether it's a communication issue with neighbours, etc., having to sign these forms, make representations, etc. There can be quite particular circumstances in which you can do this that often are legally, very precise. And I think the issue is really just to say, look, we want transparency. We want to see this kind of service level, performance level KPI being published. And if it's demonstrable that, that's not being delivered, then, the tenants can find an alternative supplier, if you like.
Yeah.
It's a perfectly reasonable thing. Otherwise, it's a private tax. If you're locked into an arrangement where you can't release yourself from it necessarily, then it becomes problematic. So I don't think there's anything to fear in it. I think it's about having accountability.
Okay.
And that's ultimately where we want to go with this.
I don't think there's anything to fear either. I suppose that just now, whether they can move or whether they can't move is all determined by the deed of conditions, title deeds, or whatever that governs what you need to be able to exit effectively. Would you agree with that? Or what do you think about this question?
I think the administration of it, and that's down to the will of the group as to whether they actually, as a group, want to move, or whether it's a small minority that are maybe finding it difficult to get their owners to engage and are then portraying it as difficult to move. Looking at it from a very, very basic point of view, most title deeds, historical, we've talked about tenements a lot, it's a simple majority, which is simple democracy. So if the majority want to go, it's very easily done. In modern developments, it's easier than that, because it tends to be a quorum. So if you've got a development of 100, you might have 5 people in that can call a meeting of all owners. At that meeting, you only need 30% of all owners present. And of that 30%, you only need a majority. So in actual fact, you can have a very small minority of people making a decision to move away from a different factor. And as we've seen, that's far easily done now with Zoom meetings and all of these things since COVID. So to me, it's more about, again, it's the information overload. And again, I think that's, to me, a government thing, as well, to say, look, here is actually how easy it is to change factor. If you just follow quite simple steps. Yes, there's going to have, as there always is, anomalies where you might have tenants where you've got commercial owners who've got a bigger percentage share who might block it, and it makes it difficult for the 6 flat owners. You could have 6 flat owners who want to move, but the commercial units own the majority percentage, so they can't. And that's just, maybe, yes, that might come in time that they'll look at that. But generally, from our experience and having spoken around the industry, there's a lot of movement of properties, moving back and forth or moving away.
And it's trickier in the case of, say, RSLs, where
That's
clearly they're a very different beast.
Or land management is a different one as well, which we kind of separate out, which is a lot of the ground maintenance stuff where it's the land is owned by an entity and the owners have an obligation to maintain. That's a very standalone niche area.
And I think there's often maybe a misunderstanding of the nature of what the factor is relative to the land manager.
Yes,
certainly in suburban housing estates where it's like Greenbelt or whatever, bought it up, and there's like speculators that buy up these like kind of little abandoned intermediate sites, and how do they then deal with those?
And these are ones, I would agree, these ones are completely different because they don't have the same, wee bit like leaseholders down south, they don't have the same ability to change as normal factoring.
And that comes back maybe to compulsory sale orders issue and CPOs and so on, and how do you tidy some of that up? And again, that is a product of bad urban planning, really. And in the case of RSLs, maybe they have a role to play in setting good standards across the sector, but a lot of them don't want to take on more factoring as well.
No, we've actually seen recently them reducing it because of the problems that they're now experiencing in terms of, because they've also, as you say, they've got their housing regulator responsibilities, they've got their landlord responsibilities. So if they factor a building that they own flats in and they can't get jobs done, they struggle, because they're then struggling in a position of...
So it falls out of their control ultimately.
Absolutely, but then they have to take it back into their control and pay for it. Where do they get the funding to pay for it? You've seen Govan Hill where they've got the funding to actually take the buildings back and in housing improvement areas, which in that circumstance is the right thing for these things to do.
And I mean, that perhaps goes back to the point that, we do need to maybe look again at housing action areas. How do we tackle some of the really high-risk properties in cities like Glasgow? And how do you create the financial underpinnings for it? I mean, there's plenty of money in the system, but again, it's not being efficiently allocated to deal with the fabric.
And there'll be private entities out there, private factors, I would imagine, that with the right discussions, in terms of, the real difficult properties, we've talked about with the Tenement Maintenance Working Group and the Owners Association, the kind of manager of last resort. So there'll be factors out there who have a passion for, certainly from our own personal, a passion to get these properties back. It's how do we get that? How do we assist in that traffic to get these buildings back into the right ownership, the right maintenance levels, to then allow them to then make the decision of who they want to factor it. So whether it's, okay, the government are bringing something in for a 2-year period to get this back to where it needs to be, and then it's over to you to go on with it. There's that element of it as well, and that's difficult when, back to the public perception, it's this, there needs to be a stopping of the knocking of heads so that we can all say, right, okay, we've all got our faults, but on the majority, we're trying to do the right thing. We're trying to, I believe most factors in this country, if not all, want to see the buildings improve, want to see the maintenance of buildings improve, and they want to be part of that process. But it's just how to get the public, to get the homeowners on board with that process. And as you say, funding is going to be the major stumbling block of that. Or I'll say that's looking negative. It could be the major positive of that if we get the right funding model in place. Through that could be the catalyst for it.
I think you're right, and honestly, I just think they're not going anywhere. Ultimately,
and we don't want them to go anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. So the ultimate goal should be this idea of a patient finance structure. I mean, John Wheatley back 100 years ago talked about a Glasgow Municipal Housing Bank, and this idea that you could use, he was talking about using the surplus from the city's tramway to build more housing. And just to create this virtuous cycle of constant self-financing construction. You could see something similar in concept to maintain and underpin the condition of our existing housing stock.
And in some developments, you talked about people staying in a development and benefiting from the uprising without paying any maintenance cost. People thought about that years ago. We deal with properties that have got 40-year-old, that are 40 years old, that on sale of the property, the outgoing owner has to pay a percentage of the value of the building, and that covers it. So they've benefited from the maintenance, so they have to put a chunk of money into the fund. So things like that.
That is predominantly retirement properties these days, though. But yes. Okay. Okay, I don't have it. We've ran way over, but that's been a really good conversation. So I just want to, is there anything you want to end on?
Well, for me, it's fabric first, because we need to get the condition of the buildings. Ultimately, it's the biggest investment anyone's ever going to make. It's fundamental to someone's hierarchy of needs from a public health perspective. having security in your home is critical.
Okay.
So for me, fabric has to be first, and we can deal with everything else on a secondary basis. But to do that, we need to have the financial underpinnings in place.
Okay, David?
No, echo the sentiment, and just again to echo that the only way we believe to do that is for us to collaborate together to get to that point. Because there's loads of stakeholders involved here, but it's pulling them all together into the one room and saying, right, let's iron this out quickly
and make something happen.
And make something happen, because it has been going on for too long. You know, you can go back to the Housing Improvement Task Force that my business partner was involved in, and you know, it's been going on for too long. But these things needed done yesterday, if not 20 years ago.
Indeed.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure.
Thank you.